Welcome back, guys. Today we travel to a beautiful city in Russia, St. Petersburg, a city of canals, palaces, and a rich, captivating history. Oleg Sokolov was born in 1956 in Leningrad. In 1979, he graduated from the Physics and Mechanics faculty of Leningrad Polytechnic Institute with a degree in engineer physicist and enrolled in the evening department of the Faculty of History at Leningrad State University. Sokolov graduated with honors and successfully defended his PhD dissertation in 1991. He focused on the history of France, and his love for Napoleon was described by those close to him as fanatical. In fact, he enjoyed making public appearances dressed as Bonaparte. Sokolov's academic achievements were recognized not only in Russia but also in Europe. In 2003, French President Jacques Chirac awarded him the Order of the Legion of Honor. Additionally, he was a visiting professor at the École pratique des hautes études in Sorbonne. In 2019, he committed a terrible and shocking act against Anastasia Yeshchenko, his former student and lover. They lived together in an apartment on the banks of the Moika River, and for a time, everything seemed great. The pair appeared happy. They were often seen together, enjoying each other's company. But at some point, their relationship began to collapse, leading to the events of November 2019 that turned Sokolov's life upside down. The news about this crime spread throughout Russia, and you've likely heard about it. If not, today, I'll tell you everything because you're on my channel where I share real criminal stories. If you want to know more, please subscribe and let's dive into the case of Anastasia Yeshchenko. As for St. Petersburg, I think it's not necessary to explain. It's an incredibly beautiful city, adorned with stunning architecture, elegant waterways, and an enchanting atmosphere. Here, our attention turns to Anastasia Yeshchenko, a 24-year-old graduate student. She was born in 1995, and from an early age, it was clear that she possessed exceptional intelligence and a passionate enthusiasm for learning. Indeed, she had a strong academic foundation. As she grew up, her passion for history flourished. She dreamed of becoming a recognized historian, a dream that led her to St. Petersburg State University. She was particularly interested in the history of France. Her friends and classmates often admired her dedication to her favorite subject. Anastasia's interest in history was so profound that she frequently embodied historical figures, carefully crafting period costumes and participating in historical reenactments. Thanks to her efforts and skills, Anastasia became a trusted assistant to her professor, Oleg Sokolov. As I mentioned, they co-authored several academic articles, and this is where a somewhat unusual aspect comes into play. Interestingly, she found many common interests with Professor Sokolov. He specialized in military history in France, particularly the Napoleonic era, which aligned perfectly with her studies. He organized and participated in reenactments of battles from the Napoleonic Wars, often dressing in period costume and fully dedicating himself to portraying Napoleon. As I mentioned, Anastasia was also involved in historical reenactments. Despite the significant age difference, akin to that between an uncle and aunt, her relationship with Oleg gradually grew romantic. Ultimately, their connection deepened into a romantic involvement. What intrigued many was her striking resemblance to Napoleon's wife Josephine. This was no coincidence, as Oleg was drawn to this resemblance. At the time, Anastasia was unaware of his interest. However, the professor had previously attempted to connect with other students, often inviting them to meet esteemed historians and gain valuable perspectives. According to some data, at one of these events, he even tried to force him to kiss one of his students. As it were, Anastasia took all this in. In the reconstruction, they came together, dressed in the appropriate outfits. He became her Napoleon, and she was his Josefina. They enjoyed their dancing, drinking, and communicating with each other, being in their images. At some point, it became clear that Oleg had a certain aura, an atmosphere of his own importance. Not only when he was wearing a suit, but also without it, he insisted that he was no different from a sir, or, more casually, a mister. That's how he referred to his old friend, Alexander Nevzorov. In general, it was unacceptable to address him in any other way. He couldn't stand it when people didn't listen to him or when they didn't do what he deemed right, and this attitude affected Nasty as well. After she completed her studies and moved out of the dormitory, Oleg insisted that she move in with him in his luxurious apartment, located in a very prestigious neighborhood, Naberezhnaya. Anna was taken aback by the proposal, but she didn't realize that this was just the first step toward Oleg's control over her. Her mother urged her to think carefully, knowing that their relationship was far from healthy, a fact that was obvious to everyone. However, Anna insisted that she was making the right choice and that this was her path. She believed that Oleg would someday propose to her with both his hands and his heart. After moving in, she began to assist him with lectures and research. Initially, they appeared happy together, or at least it seemed that way. However, increasingly frequent nervous calls started to emerge. She became so overwhelmed by Oleg's pressure that she stopped visiting her friends, severed her relationship with her mother, who opposed their relationship, and abandoned her favorite interests. Her life became entirely dedicated to Oleg. Little did she know that these relationships would ultimately lead to a real tragedy. On the 9th of November 2019, a regular taxi driver, Gary Kaivazian, stopped by the banks of the Moika River and got out of his car to tie his shoes. His calmness was abruptly shattered by cries coming from the river. When he looked over, he saw someone in the water. It was Oleg Sokolov. He appeared to be heavily intoxicated. Oleg turned to the taxi driver, asking him not to call the police, and instead to help him get out. However, the banks made it impossible for Gary to assist him. It was cold, as it was November. Concerned for Oleg's health, Gary made the decision to call an ambulance and the police. Within just 5 minutes, rescuers arrived and pulled Oleg from the water. Shortly afterward, the police arrested him upon discovering a bag containing 2 severed human hands. The tragic truth quickly became known. The severed limbs belonged to Anastasia Yeshchenko. There were concerns that the river might harbor other sinister secrets, so divers were sent to carefully search the bottom for additional evidence. Within just 2 days of the search, her legs and the rest of her body were discovered. Through the investigation, information from Oleg, surveillance camera footage, and testimonies from those close to Anastasia gradually painted a clearer picture of the events that had happened. And this chain of events, however tragic, helps to clarify the cause of Anastasia's death. 2 days before her body was discovered on November 7th, Anastasia had a fierce argument with Oleg and called her brother. During the conversation, she mentioned that he had hit her after she expressed her desire to attend her birthday party. The family suspected that her relationship with Oleg was far from ideal, but they had no idea of the extent of the issues. Soon after that initial call, she reached out to her brother again, but this time her voice sounded flat and devoid of emotion. She had told him that the situation was under control and there was no reason for him to worry. But, as you might guess, Oleg had pressured her into lying to her friends. Moreover, he accused her of being unfaithful, claiming that her birthday celebration was an excuse for meeting another man. Unfortunately, as the argument escalated, the severity of his violence increased. As a fan of historical reenactments, Oleg had amassed a considerable collection of weapons in his apartment. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a gun from the wall, loaded it, and fired 4 shots at Anastasia. The first shot wasn't enough, and Oleg had to reload the gun several times until he finally hit her. Distraught, he moved the lifeless Anastasia to the next room and hid her under the bed. While he contemplated what to do next, it became evident that he was in no rush to act. Interestingly, the following day he attended a dinner with colleagues, enjoying drinks and delicacies while Anastasia's body lay in the next room. Later that night, after the guests had left, Oleg, under the influence of cognac, finally devised a plan of action. He retrieved a knife from the kitchen and set to work, attempting to dismember Anastasia's body and pack the remains into several bags to dispose of them in the Moika River, which was located not far from his home. Surveillance cameras captured him disposing of the numerous bags. On his first trip, he discarded her legs, and on the second, he disposed of her torso. However, during his third trip, he lost his balance and fell into the cold water, where he was later discovered by a concerned taxi driver. During the search of his apartment, investigators discovered the remaining fragments of Anastasia's body, including her head, carefully wrapped in an IKEA bag. How did it all come to this, you ask? It seems that Oleg had a desire to share his story with her friends and relatives. During their fight, Anastasia had made remarks about one of Oleg's daughters, which apparently infuriated him. Ironically, Oleg later claimed that he acted in self-defense, asserting that Anastasia had used violence against him during the altercation. According to him, she even threw a knife at him. However, considering what we already know, Oleg's version seems extremely unlikely. Tragically, we may never know the full reality of what happened. Friends of Anastasia insisted that she would never harm anyone, let alone throw a knife at someone close to her. This behavior simply does not align with her character. As for Anastasia's family, during the investigation, the police showed them a disturbing video. Not only were they unaware of the events surrounding the crime at the time, but they also learned about the horrifying details through news reports on TV and online resources. As a result of a psychological evaluation, Oleg was deemed mentally fit and aware of his actions at the time of the crime. In December 2020, Professor Oleg Sokolov was brought to trial. There, he continued to assert that he acted in self-defense. In his testimony, he portrayed Anastasia as a kind and caring person, but claimed that on that night she was unrecognizable, angry, and entirely different from her usual self. Oleg stated that after the first shot, he completely lost consciousness and that the rest of the night felt like a blur. Being a successful man, he hired very expensive lawyers who tried to negotiate a minimal sentence for him. The defense hoped for a reduced sentence of 8 years. However, their efforts were unsuccessful. In the end, Sokolov was sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. Oleg and his lawyers immediately filed an appeal. Interestingly, during the court proceedings, Oleg expressed sincere regret over the tragedy and asked for forgiveness from Anastasia's parents. However, he never directly asked for forgiveness. He was expected to ask for forgiveness. Instead, he focused on seeking a reduction of his sentence. According to his close colleagues, the line between him and Napoleon often blurred. When he embraced this persona, it seemed as if he fully transformed into a historical figure. Despite considering himself psychologically healthy, there were moments when he genuinely believed he was Napoleon, or at least his reincarnation. In his delusions, he ensnared the unfortunate girl who became a victim of his charisma and his troubled character. Unfortunately, this whole situation led to a terrible and unnecessary death. Her family felt a deep loss, and indeed, when parents bury their children, it was terrible. In conclusion, I would like to hear your thoughts on the case of Oleg, since I personally believe that 12 years is not enough. Thank you for watching.